Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by Remax St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose Remax.
Hello, my name is Andrew Faas, and welcome to Following the Golden Rule.
And I'm Jay Remer, and for 26 weeks, Andy and I will be discussing the ABCs of building character. Today, we're going to rebroadcast the introduction to this series, and so we're going to make a few comments about the introduction before we get started. Recorded almost 4 months ago, you made some predictions based on the then current cultural, political, and economic environment. You urged people to become engaged as leaders in our communities, families, and indeed ourselves. I'd like you to comment on the current state of affairs, your predictions, and the importance of the message you gave us as it pertains to the situation today.
Well, it's a good time to be doing this because we're actually at the halfway point of the 26-week series, and I thought it would be a good idea to just refresh ourselves as to why we're doing this. Mm-hmm. And as you know, and I thank you for it, convincing me to do this series because, quite frankly, I had given up on trying to influence the changes I thought were necessary by convincing the influencers, or the 1% or 10% of the population that has benefited from the rebounding of the economy from a decade ago. Mm-hmm. And my the last piece I wrote on this topic was over a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. And by going back and looking at the articles that I wrote on the ABCs of leadership, which is now the ABCs of character building, it helped me therapeutically. However, it left me feeling even more disgruntled than when we started this. And as you know, I introduced myself as an old disgruntled man with much to be disgruntled about.
Yes.
And came to the realization that maybe we were talking to the wrong audience, still trying to convince the people who are in power today to change. And there's ample evidence that change is necessary, and even it's even more important than when we started out. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, some of the things that I predicted are actually occurring, and for you to ask, okay, what are my predictions now? I don't know. Mm-hmm. For me, my target audience really is the bystanders. Mm-hmm. And people are going to be called on, have been and are going to be called on to really force the kind of change that is necessary. Mm-hmm. And look at it beyond just protesting. Mm-hmm. Look at it in terms of how can I, as an individual, influence the kind of changes that are necessary to do something. Mm-hmm. And what is that something? Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go back to what you'll hear in the introduction, is fighting for our rights.
Yes.
And our rights come from something that was agreed on by our countries in 1976. And they're very straightforward. The right to work in just and favorable conditions. The right for social protections. The right to an adequate standard of living. The right to the highest standards of health. And the right to education and cultural reform. And as I indicated in the introduction, that doesn't come from a socialist manifesto. It comes from the International Covenant of Economic and Social Rights. Now, people in power today either have to re-ratify that to something different or deliver on it.
Yes.
And that's what I think we're trying to do here, is to get people to force influencers to deliver on these rights.
Yes. So another part of the show that I think has been that we've been reinforcing is that of self-reflection, and I'm just wondering if you could comment on the importance of self-reflection.
Sure. Well, when we talk about developing leaders of character, we do say that everyone can be a leader of character, and that takes self-reflection. So it's self-reflection on who you are and what you stand for, and why do you stand for it. And it is so important for people to look at that beyond the words. Oh, I'm going to be kind, or I'm going to be kinder, I'm going to be nicer, I'm going to be more empathetic. And it has to go beyond that. But with the view that I may have to be something different than what I am today. And by looking at it in this kind of in-depth way, comprehensive way, by going through 26 letters of the alphabet, and there are more values and characteristics that are important and that can help people by focusing on that characteristic become that leader of character.
Exactly.
I've given my take on it, and it's important for people to kind of weigh in with themselves to say, first, does character matter?
Yes.
And then, what do you mean? What do we mean by that?
That's right.
And then go through each of those letters and ask yourself that question: does it matter? If it matters, then do something about it.
That's right. Well, I think that the idea of self-reflection is important, and it's something that we have more time for now in the midst of the COVID, where socialization has been diminished. And I think it is the stepping stone for bystanders to become more engaged in not only their own lives, but the lives of people in the community, which strengthens communities, and that, I think, is the transformation that's needed.
Yes, and we need to define engaged, and the definition in what we're talking about is to become defenders, protectors, and supporters.
Well, I think that is a good segue into the introduction, so I hope you all enjoy the introduction tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week, when we will be discussing N is for Nurturer.
Hello, my name is Andrew Faas. I am an angry, disgruntled old man with much to be disgruntled about. Welcome to Following the Golden Rule, a series we will be broadcasting over the next 26 weeks to help people become leaders of character. Since the financial meltdown just over a decade ago, I have dedicated my life to helping organizations create psychologically safe, fair, and productive workplaces. This involved researching and writing about organizational dynamics and cultures. A few years ago, I predicted, unless we change the command, control, autocratic leadership model that exists in most of our institutions, cultural time bombs will explode, putting at risk the viability of our institutions in every segment of our society, including democracy. I take no pleasure in having this prediction become reality. Over the last 2 decades, our collective soul has eroded to the point character is no longer considered a virtue. Bullies are heroes, and the abnormal has been normalized. Our only salvation is for leaders of character taking the lead in reforming our institutions. Following the Golden Rule was inspired by a series of articles I wrote for Money Inc. called A Boomer's Guide for Millennials, the ABCs of Leadership, describing 26 characteristics necessary to be a leader of character, asking people to go back to the future and relearn what we all learned in kindergarten, and then apply the simple premise of the ethic of reciprocity, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. We also advanced the notion that everyone can be a leader of character. We cannot afford to be bystanders in what will become the most defining point of who we are and what we represent as individuals, as organizations, as communities, and as nations. We believe mobilizing leaders of character can be the collective force of power for this reformation. How we as individuals, institutions, and communities respond to the horrible catastrophe we are in, both for the immediate and long term, will define the new world and its norms. I believe the new world and its norms must be a more collaborative social and economic model, where everyone, regardless of color, background, gender, and orientation, feels included, engaged, and appreciated. This collaborative model must be applied to every aspect of our lives, where we live, where we learn, where we work, where we worship, where we play, and where we socialize. Unfortunately, we have a very short window of opportunity to go through this reformation, and too few people of character to lead and influence it. Over the past 2 decades, capitalism, which is our social and economic model, has been destroyed by rot. Much of the blame must be attributed to the 1%ers, and in particular, the old white boys network, where entitlement, power, control, greed, abuse, and corruption became the norms. Our addiction for the short-term gains created the toxic cultures evident in most of our institutions. I must declare, I am one of the 1%ers, and apologize for how badly we, the 1%ers, have so totally screwed up pre and post the financial meltdown a decade ago. My article, The Wealth Gap is Real, but Capitalism Can Work for All, was published in The Hill 1 year ago. It was intended to persuade my fellow 1%ers to reform capitalism, something I have been advancing since the financial meltdown. A year ago, I was somewhat optimistic, because just before my article was published, 2 bastions of the establishment, Bridgewater's Ray Dalio and J.P. Morgan's Jamie Dimon, issued a sober warning, and I quote, "Unless capitalism is reformed, there will be class warfare." Naively, I reasoned that this, coming from them, would be a wake-up call for my fellow one-percenters. Despite the warnings, other than some rhetoric, very little has changed, leaving us disarmed in our ability to define the new world and its norms, and leaving us vulnerable to have this defined for us by autocrats. In the immediate, these people will rationalize becoming even more autocratic, using protests and the coronavirus as an excuse to clamp down further. The sad reality is that coronavirus will be used as the reason our system failed. Let me be clear. Coronavirus only hastened the inevitable. Coronavirus came to us when a good majority of our workers felt afraid, unsafe, insecure, unfairly treated, excluded, exploited, and abused. It came to us when close to 80% of families lived paycheck to paycheck. It came to us during a mental health and addiction crisis. It came to us during a loneliness epidemic. It came to us when only 35% of workers feel engaged. It came to us when over 120,000 deaths annually may be attributable to workplace stress, the same number coronavirus is expected to claim. And it came at a time when trust in institutions and their leadership is at an all-time low. If the Reformation does not address these conditions, we face a social and economic Armageddon. To address these conditions, the Reformation must be grounded on rights that apply to everyone. The right to work in just and favorable conditions. The right to social protections. The right to an adequate standard of living. The right to the highest standards of health. And the right to education and cultural benefits. Now, it is fair to say, too great a proportion of our citizens have been denied these rights. These rights do not come out of a socialist manifesto. They are rights entrenched in the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which were ratified by our countries in 1976. It amazes me that very few people realize these rights exist, including the media and our politicians. I do not know how we can possibly rely on current leadership to reform that ensures these rights become reality for all. This is why we so desperately need more people of character to lead and influence the Reformation. Starting next week, Following the Golden Rule will cover every letter in the alphabet, beginning with A is for authentic, followed by B is for believable, C is for courageous, and so on. Next week, Jay Remer, author of The 6 Pillars of Civility, will be hosting the program to avoid me from going on a rant. After each episode, we will ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, rank yourself on each characteristic. Then ask yourself how others would rank you. Then pick an individual you most highly regard, and for each characteristic, rank him or her on the characteristic. Then think about why you gave these rankings. I hope you will join me here next Thursday at 6:30 p.m. on what I think you will find an insightful journey.
Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by Remax St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose Remax.